Welcome back to Things That Are Harder Than You Think, where we examine features in video games that are harder than you might imagine. Today, doors. Doors are an interesting one because not only are they much more difficult than you might imagine, but because they're such a mundane feature that you think should be incredibly easy, there's not a lot of celebration for a well-implemented door. Just because you managed to make your doors not suck, no one's throwing you a party or giving you an award. Doors are both very difficult, but also relatively thankless. We're going to go through doors slightly differently than the way we've done this in the past. We're going to go through it from the perspective of a player encountering a door. I will also interject from time to time to add some context where things are even more complicated or more intricate when it comes to multiplayer. First, you're walking along and you see a door. So what kind of door is it? There are basically 5 different kinds of doors. There are fake doors. Those are doors that have the appearance of being usable but actually aren't. There are monster closets, which are doors the player can't interact with, but are used by creatures to enter into the environment. There are loot closets, which are interactable, but the player can't actually go through the doorway. They just interact with the door and get something. Basically, they're a treasure chest turned on its side. Then there are cosmetic doors. These are doors where you interact with them, you go through them, but they never block the player. They are there just to break up the environment, or to add visual interest, or to make a space look more realistic. And then the final kind of door is a lockable door. This is a door that can actually be used either by the plot or by the gameplay to block the player's progression. So why does it matter? Well, it matters because you need the player to be able to distinguish between these different kinds of doors at a distance, or at the very least be able to tell the difference between the doors that they can interact with and that are worth their while to walk up to, and the doors that they should ignore, that are just part of the backdrop. In your art direction, or through some other means, you need to consider how the player is going to distinguish between the different types of doors. A minor multiplayer consideration here. It is possible that if you have different players and they're seeing the same door, that the way or type of door that each player is seeing might be slightly different. One player may have already interacted with that door and opened it. One player may have the key to a door. Something to keep in mind that you may need to be able to have different players seeing the state of the door in different ways. Okay, so you've seen the door, and this is a kind of door that you're going to interact with. So now you're going to walk up to the door. The next question, how big is this door? Normal doors in our everyday lives are actually a lot smaller than you might think. And in video games, making doors to scale actually makes them feel really small. And they actually kind of get in the way when the player actually tries to walk through the doorway. So typically, you're going to actually want to scale that door up a little bit. Maybe as much as 50% compared to what would be the size of a door in the real world. But then that causes a problem, because if you scale that door up and don't scale up the things around it, it sort of doesn't fit in the environment anymore. Okay, you're almost to the door. You've almost started to interact with it. Next question, how do you interact with the door? Are there multiple ways to interact with the door? Can I knock? Can I pick a lock? Can I look through the keyhole? And if I can interact with it in a bunch of different ways, how does the user interface work for all these things? How does the player decide the way they're going to interact with the door? Okay, but now you've decided you're going to just open the door. Am I going to reach out and grab a doorknob and twist it to open the door? Because if so, then I need to be standing in the right place to do that, or you need to have some form of IK on my arm to allow the player to reach in various different places in order to grab that doorknob. So that's not necessarily the way you want to approach it. This is an instance where improving the fidelity of a specific feature can actually degrade the fidelity of the game overall. If you look at a game like Jade Empire, it actually has an elaborate chest opening animation. In order for that animation to play properly, we had to get you in front of the chest. So interacting with chests actually requires this not very great looking pathfinding that precedes the animation to open the chest. If instead we had just had you kick the chest or just had the chest open automatically, the overall experience would have actually been better and at higher fidelity. You can often get away with a door that is always just a push. Even though most doors in the real world don't actually work that way, they have a knob or a latch or some sort of interaction point. For the purposes of video games, you probably don't want to bother with that knob. In multiplayer, any interaction is a potential danger spot because you have to consider what happens if multiple players interact with the door at the same time, especially if there are different kinds of interactions, because one player could be locking the door while another player is opening the door, and that could get you into a situation where you have a door that is open but locked, which might not be a state that you actually support, and now you have a door that's sort of stuck in this intermediary state. Always when you can potentially have multiple interactions, you have to be very careful about transitions and checking your states. Okay, so you've almost got there. You've almost opened the door, but wait, is it a push or a pull? In the real world, you actually see people failing this test all the time, pulling on doors that are push and pushing on doors that are pull. What I would recommend in the case of video games is that all doors are push. Everything is double hinged and always swings away from the player. This means you don't have to have animations where you are pulling the door towards yourself. Next time you have a door that is a pull, sort of think about what you're doing. It's actually quite an elaborate series of animations that is required for you to pull a door open and then proceed through it. Whereas a push is relatively simple. You can kind of just push the door out of the way. Another advantage of making doors a push is that you can actually do a little trick and make them, instead of being double hinged, essentially make them quadruple hinged. So they always swing away from the player in the way that is most convenient for what is going on in the moment. Believe me, players won't notice that doors are changing which side the hinges are on all the time, and it will simplify the interaction of going through the door. But as long as we're here, have you considered maybe elevator doors? It's appropriate to your setting. Doors that slide out of the way actually eliminate a lot of problems. So think about other things you could do instead of standard doors that might simplify the situation. Okay, we're 7 minutes in, we haven't even opened the door yet. So let's just pause for a second and say that if you are enjoying this video, think about giving it a like, think about sharing it with some other people, but let's get back to that door. So it's a push, great, and you got rid of the doorknob. So now the door starts to open. But wait, what if there's something standing behind that door? Is there physics on the door as it's opening? And if there is, what happens? Can you block a doorway with something? Can someone stand behind a door? How does that work? What you see in a lot of games is that while the door is in the process of opening, it actually doesn't have physics on it. So it will pass through things that are standing in the way. This is obviously not realistic, but it does simplify the transition state immensely because in that medium state, it's just playing an animation. Nothing can stop it. If you do want to have it have physics on it, then you have to deal with the fact that it is possible for doorways to be blocked by things, and potentially things you didn't consider. If physics affects everything in the world, then a broom handle or something could potentially block and prevent player progression because it might get stuck behind a door, or a corpse from someone that was killed earlier, or a multitude of other things. It's a choice you can make, but it does dramatically increase your probability space. Okay, so you've got the door, you've swung it open, and now it's in an open state. So now what happens? Well, the first thing that happens is a bunch of light comes spilling through that open doorway. If you're using light maps or some other pre-baked lighting solution, you need potentially to switch your lighting in that room to something else. If you're doing dynamic lighting, then you've just complicated the calculation of that lighting solution. Also, you've changed the audio environment. New sounds are able to enter the space where the listener is at. Also, you've changed potentially the situation for your streaming system, which bundles need to be in or out of memory have just changed because a door has changed state. And finally, pathfinding. Now the pathfinding mesh of the world has changed because something that was formerly a blocker has been removed, or moved at least. So what do the creatures in the world do? Do they recalculate their paths, or do they just stick to the path they had before? Either one could result in kind of odd behavior because the path that they had chosen before to go way around might now look really odd, but them reversing direction in the middle of movement can also look very strange. So you might want to think about different behaviors for your AI depending on what happens when the pathfinding changes because a door has been opened. Okay, so now you've got it open, the pathfinding's changed, and the player is going through the door. That's pretty good, but can they stop in the doorway? And if they do they block that doorway? And then are they now effectively another door getting in the way of everyone else's pathfinding? This is particularly problematic in multiplayer games because you can introduce a form of griefing where people can block these bottlenecks with their bodies in order to just be annoying. That said, it seems like followers and companions like nothing better than to stand directly in every single pathfinding bottleneck that exists in your game. You figured that out, you're going to move on, you're going to get in there. Okay, can that door that you opened before be closed again? And if it does, and if you can, what does that do to the pathfinding and so on and so forth? And if the door was formerly locked, can I relock it? Can I lose the key after I've locked it and then no longer be able to open the door? In a lot of cases, doors that can be locked are essentially, from the perspective of the game, single use. You find the key or other mechanism in order to open the door, and once you've opened the door, it stays in that state forever. Because having to deal with the fact that you may or may not have the key anymore, or that you could go through a door, lock it behind you, and then effectively permanently change the pathfinding situation on the level is something that you probably don't want to deal with. Okay, one more question. If your state change do persist, if you can lock and unlock doors and relock them, if doors can be opened and closed and opened again and reclosed, are you going to save that in your save game? Are you going to save all of them in your save game? One of the cool things about cosmetic doors is often you can actually ignore a lot of this stuff. If they're never locked, then you don't need to worry about them blocking pathfinding. They just are a thing that causes an interaction as something passes through their space. It's actually quite a good idea to just have them return to a closed state as soon as they are able to. So they're always there looking correct, but never really permanently changing the state of your world. Now, obviously, this isn't the case for those lockable doors because those are there for a purpose. You need to understand if they have been unlocked, but also potentially save a lot more information about them as well. So why are doors harder than you think? It's because they're a collection of a lot of other things, of interaction, of user interface, of visual language. They're a transition. They're something that is affected by multiplayer. They change the pathfinding, they change the lighting. And all of that is wrapped up in something so mundane that they don't get the attention that they often deserve. I hope you found this useful. If you did, give this a like and share it with someone else you think might benefit, and I'll see you again soon.